So, I have to ask you, do you abide by the rules of composition?
No. But I think the so-called rules of composition are not bad guidelines to have sometimes as a starting point, to be aware of, to then be ignored at will. And you?
Yeah, I'm probably even more iconoclastic. I really defy the rules of composition.
Deliberately?
No, but because I agree with you in a way. But I think they can be very misleading in the sense that they can become like a straitjacket of a formula. And the landscape doesn't look like that anyway. You know, everything's a continuum of relationships. What I think matters is proportion and balance and flow and depth.
Yeah.
And by the time you thought about these sort of major and rather kind of vague sounding parameters, if you then try to lock in those things in some kind of formulaic way, it just doesn't work.
Do you compose a picture then when you've got to a location? Do you compose it before you've got the camera out the bag, or do you use the framing of the camera to help you?
I've usually done most of it before I get the camera out, I would say, and I quite often will use either a card or a viewfinder, remote little optical finder, which I find helpful just to sort of set the boundaries so that you know. But I can look at, as I'm sure you do, look at the scene. You can imagine the sidelines, top and bottom lines. Sometimes wonder, why do we always use a four-sided figure? But anyway, we do, because that's what a camera gives you. It's funny when you think the image circle is actually a circle.
Yeah.
However, the fact is we work with this four-sided figure. It isn't a fixed point. It just happens to be that's the shape that the camera offers you. So I'm not against cropping if the proportions of what you're looking at needs to be different.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that? But it is inevitable that the camera you use has an influence on the way that you see, I think.
I try and make decisions about that relationship between foreground and background, and of course lens choice and composition before I unzip the camera bag. I find if I don't, it's just far too easy to start going wide and incorporating far too much composition, foreground interest at the expense of the background. And so I'm always thinking about that relationship. For example, if I'm in a mountain environment, I want those mountains to look big. So going too wide is clearly going to be a mistake. But funnily enough, I find in the digital era, I am actually exposing fewer frames than I did in the film era, because I think I can be that much more analytical about it, and I'm not having to bracket exposures the way we did.
You can be completely secure about exposure.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference, doesn't it? Whereas in the past, you would have at least probably gone minus and plus one and minus and plus a half as well as normal.
Plus we wanted multiple originals, didn't we? Do you remember?
You bet.
That was madness, really.
Yeah, crazy. But it's funny to think that the lenses, they definitely do have a big influence. Most of us do have zooms, and it's inevitable that we're able to benefit from that. But sometimes in my larger format systems, I don't have any zooms. No. I can go out with one camera and one lens. Yeah. It might be a sort of average wide lens, and the discipline that gives is actually really helpful in a way. Just stick with one way of seeing. Perspective is very, very significant, I think, for an effective composition. And so where you actually place the tripod and what height all these differences are absolutely critical. Knowing where to put the lens.
It's funny, watching people on the courses we run, they almost by default set tripods up at head height, and yet so often you can
get something more interesting.
Absolutely, by going
down,
high
back,
or
left, right, whatever.
On a rock. Yeah.
It's just, that's creativity, and I think that's the thing that you always have to bear in mind when you're thinking about composition, is that the rules should never inhibit your creativity.